What's up, everybody? It's Toad. This is Better Off Dead Wednesday edition, January 15th. I don't know what day it is anymore. 5-2 yesterday. Don't judge me by the Wyoming play, man. Oh, Toad, you're such an idiot. Wyoming lost by like 50 points or whatever, 40 points. Yeah, I know, but I went 3-1 in college basketball and 2-0 sweep of the hockey board. Both hockey plays, the line moved against me in both of them. Still, they both won. So I'm happy about that. I mean, last night was a fun night. It started off looking really good with Auburn with a nice easy win in the injured player theory spot. No Broom, no problem. They still swept the floor with Mississippi State. Easy win there. Then Columbus Blue Jackets. For some reason, I wasn't sweating that one, even though it was tied for a lot of the game. The Blue Jackets took a 2-1 lead late, blew that lead, and they wound up having to win in a shootout. So it was actually kind of dramatic, but I wasn't totally paying attention. I'm like, oh, they won. All right, fine. So that got there. And then it started looking like it was going to go a little bit haywire as the Chicago Bulls blew it after they were leading for more than half the game. Of course, why wouldn't the Chicago Bulls blow it on me for another game in a row? What can you do about that? And then we had, what did I have yesterday? Kansas State. As we started getting into the later games there, everything started coming through again for me there, except for Boise, obviously. I mean, Wyoming. Wyoming got absolutely annihilated in that game. It was never close. I'm like, all right, well, that's a dead one. Those are the ones that are easier to take. When you just get blown out, you can just forget about it. Like, the game's not even halfway over. It's over. Forget about it. Kansas State got there. They were looking like they had a decent shot to win that game outright at the end. They didn't get there. I actually wound up taking a 7 on that instead of the 6.5 I talked about on the show. I gave out 6.5. There was a 7 out there shortly after that, so I grabbed it. Either way, they hit on the spread, didn't hit on the money line, losing by, I think, 4. So that was a good one. And then they played pretty well in that game. And then I had, what else did I have there? Well, I mean, San Jose State was the big one at the end. That was that was the last one to come in. San Jose State, they were down 10 early, but it never got worse than that, I don't think. So they were never actually, I think it was actually a wire-to-wire cover. Maybe they were down by a little bit more than 10, but they got themselves right back in that game, and it was close for basically the entirety of the remainder of the game, really. Once they were down by that one early margin, they erased it, and it was close the rest of the way, played slower pace from then on, and not only did they cover that game, but they won outright at the end. I don't know if you guys were watching the end of that, but I believe they won on a buzzer beater. I kind of had it on, and then I turned it back on like a second too late, basically. I'm like, what just happened? They just won. Because I was trying to see if they were going to win the game outright at that point, because it was very close going down the stretch. Big moneyline cash on a 10-point dog on San Jose State. There you go. That's right, Toad. Nice play on that one, San Jose State. Spread hits, and then the money line gives you a little extra there if you sprinkled on it. Hell yeah. And then the other hockey play got there too. Nashville Predators. They're winning the whole game. They're up 2-0 early, and they never surrendered it, although it got to within 1 goal late, but it was like too little too late for Vegas in that one. Big win for the Nashville Predators, the Nashville sex offenders, as I like to call them. But they've been an undervalued team. Could take them in a lot of spots this year, and that was one of them. They won, and they hit on an empty netter in the final second to win by 2 again. Let's talk about today's slate, man. Let's not belabor this any longer here, because we have a big Wednesday college basketball slate that I got to talk about here. And I'm playing a couple of these games that are in the earlier, like 6:30 p.m. slate. Let's get right into it, shall we? Vanderbilt minus 8.5 is going to be a play for me in the first big game of the day, SEC matchup at least. This is South Carolina at Vandy, and on the surface, this line, I think to the public, is going to look a little bit big, because I mean, Vandy has a good record. Even I think Vandy is a little bit overrated, but I kind of think both of these teams have a record that's a little bit misleading. I think both teams are a little bit worse than they actually are, but Vandy is clearly the better of these two teams. South Carolina sitting only slightly behind them in records, and the public probably has seen what South Carolina has done recently, so the public probably wants South Carolina, but, I mean, their schedule, it's been decent. I mean, they played competitively against Xavier. That's not bad. Losing to Indiana, I mean, you maybe give them a pass for that, although Indiana's down a little bit this year. Win over Clemson was their probably their best win, but that was that's a rivalry game where both teams get up for it. And South Carolina might actually even feel like they're the little brother in that rivalry because Clemson has been the better team recently. Then they got massacred by Mississippi State, Alabama, and Auburn. And now, massacred by Mississippi, lost to Alabama pretty badly. And then they played Auburn close. So that's what I was about to say. This is why I'm going to fade South Carolina. South Carolina's coming off this game where they almost pulled off a giant upset against Auburn, man. And not only that, but it was 3 step-up games in a row. And I know they didn't play close in the others, but still, they played 3 straight ranked teams, and now they're having to go out on the road after that. In this game against Auburn, they could have won this game, man. South Carolina was winning this game for a decent chunk of it. Going into halftime, they were winning into the second half, hanging around for the entire rest of the game. They never went away, and they were within 1 point in the final minute of the game, in the final seconds, really. It came down to the final possession, and they lost that game. I know Broom got hurt in the game for Broom. Is that his name, Broom? I think it is, right? I feel like I keep getting that wrong. Whoever Auburn's, it's Johnny Broom, right? I don't even know, man. I don't know these people's names. Whoever it was, the injured player for Auburn here who got injured in this game. Yeah, Johnny Broom, there it is. So I was right. He got hurt in this game, but regardless, this was a huge performance with South Carolina. They were a 16.5-point underdog at home. They almost pulled off the upset over the number 2 ranked team in the country, who's now number 1. And coming off of that, I just don't see it, man. I don't see how they're going to get back up off the mat that quickly after that game. That's a crazy game, crazy run of games, but especially that one. And now they're having to go play a true road game at Vandy, which is not going to be easy. Vandy is a weird place to play, too. It's them in Minnesota. They kind of have the crowd like right on top of the floor, where the first like row of the crowd is kind of down in the floor, and it's almost like the crowd's like right there, like right next to you. It's kind of a crazy environment there, although, of course, SEC teams are used to playing there, but still. We're looking at South Carolina also has not played that many true road games yet. They lost at Indiana, beat BC on the road, which who cares? Got crushed by Mississippi State, so those are their only 3 true road games, so it hasn't been that good for them on the road either. Vandy, on the other hand, I actually think they're a little bit under the radar. I mean, they've won almost every game that they've played, although their schedule hasn't been that strong either, but they beat TCU, beat Virginia Tech. I mean, those teams aren't great, but Seton Hall's down, but still another big conference win. Beat Cal, beat Nevada. I mean, those wins aren't that bad. Losing to Drake. Drake is quite good. They beat LSU on the road to start SEC play, and then since then, they've lost 2 in a row to Mississippi State and Missouri, but we saw what Missouri did last night. Missouri just beat Florida, so that Missouri team, losing to them on the road, no shame in that, really, and losing to Mississippi State, no shame in that either. So this Vandy team may very well be competitive. A little bit of a hesitation because they do have Tennessee up next, and then Alabama, and then Kentucky. But Tennessee is like the huge game for Vandy because that's a big Tennessee rivalry. But I think Vandy's going to still show up for this, man. When you've lost 2 games in a row like this, you're looking for a win. You saw what South Carolina just did. South Carolina, I think, is in quite the hangover spot here. So I actually don't think Vandy will look ahead here when they've lost 2 games in a row. I think they will show up in this one. I'll lay it with Vandy. They're up from 7 through the 8 now with Jews. I would have obviously loved to have gotten a 7, but I don't know that really there was a 7 ever out there. I think maybe 7.5, but 7 is really the key number there. So 7.5, 8.5, there's not a whole lot of difference there. I'll lay the points with Vandy in that one. All right. Let's see. Western Carolina, I mean, I would consider maybe fading them in this game at VMI. They just pulled off a win over Mercer, and I told you Mercer was in a pretty bad spot in that game, which I liked Western Carolina, plus the points in that one. Mercer was coming off a close game against East Tennessee, and they had Samford up next, which is today's game. So Mercer had that game surrounded by 2 bigger games. They got caught in that game. Now Western Carolina is coming off a nice upset win over Mercer. They got VMI here, and they have UNC Greensboro and East Tennessee State up next, and those are 2 of the top teams in the conference pretty much at this point. And VMI, surprising, VMI, as bad as they are, Western Carolina is obviously pretty bad too because VMI is actually laying points in this game, so that looks pretty strange too. They're laying like 2.5 or 3. Even though they're a terrible team, they've been awful. They've basically been a doormat in this conference for as long as anybody can remember. 0-4 in conference, and they're laying points, which looks a little bit suspect. But it may be warranted in this one. They're up from 1.5 to 3 in this one. So that's I would lean to VMI in that one. All right, we got Davidson and LaSalle I'll talk about because that's another play of mine. Davidson minus 1.5, and I know this one looks square. This line hasn't even moved, so it almost looks like they're begging you to take Davidson, but I actually think the spot is correct to take Davidson here. I know they have the better record. I know they have the name behind them. It's Steph Curry's alma mater or whatever. LaSalle doesn't have a good-looking record, but based on what LaSalle just did in their last game, and I watched a decent amount of the end of that game, I think the spot's going to set up nicely for Davidson here. Davidson, I mean, they've just won a couple of games in a row. They had a nice win over Duquesne. Duquesne is flying under the radar, so that was a pretty good win. Losing at George Mason, and George Mason is playing really well this year too, so I'm not going to shame them for that. And now they're coming off an easier win against Fordham, so that's what they're coming off of. I know they do have Rhode Island next, which is that cause for a look ahead? Hopefully not. I mean, Rhode Island, yeah, I mean, they're playing pretty well, but they've started kind of sliding a little bit, so I don't know. I mean, I think Davidson's just kind of going to carry momentum into this one, and they know what LaSalle just did, and this is why I'm going to fade LaSalle in this game. LaSalle, they just pulled off a giant upset at St. Bonaventure. St. Bonaventure had one of the best records in the conference, in the Atlantic 10, and not only did they upset them as a 12.5-point underdog, but they did it in overtime. The end of this game was crazy. And then the way that they won the game at the end was, I believe, on a buzzer beater, or essentially a buzzer beater. There was an off-balance, well-defended three. The video's right here. I had it on. I was watching it when I was eating. I was like, holy crap. I couldn't believe that shot went in. I mean, there was nothing St. Bonaventure could do at that point. They played good defense, man defense on that play. And LaSalle, the guy just threw up. It was a Deuce Jones is his name. The deuce is loose. He just chucked up a shot. I mean, he had to, basically, at that point. Just, you got to do whatever you can. And it went in, and they won the game on it. It was totally wild, man. Bonaventure was winning a lot of this game, but they never were able to pull away. And LaSalle was able to come out of there with a win, even though St. Bonaventure shot 52.4% from three. Crazy number, and they still lost the game. St. Bonaventure lost the turnover battle pretty badly at home. So LaSalle, maybe it means they can take care of the ball, but after that, I think that puts LaSalle in a pretty major hangover spot after that, and pretty major letdown spot. That was a huge win. That was like your win of the year type of scenario there, man. And LaSalle, I mean, they haven't really stepped up that well in class. Most of their wins are pretty bad, to be honest. Besides that one, their best win besides that one they just came off of was, I don't know, either Temple or Cornell. I mean, that's not great. So this Davidson team is definitely the better team here. So I'm going to go with Davidson in that one. Oh, and by the way, Vandy, I forgot to mention, Vandy is going to also speed up the pace as they're 50th in tempo, and South Carolina likes to slow the pace. So Vandy could easily speed up that game and throw South Carolina out of their preferred pace as well. So I like that aspect of it as well. LaSalle, KenPom, as LaSalle is a fast-paced team, so that does concern me a little bit because I don't actually think that Davidson is as much so. Davidson, yeah, they play slower, so that worries me a little bit, but I don't know because LaSalle is the significantly worse team. I don't know that they'll be able to totally take control, and Davidson being 24th in luck does worry me a little bit too, but they are the significantly better team, and LaSalle's up there in luck too at 93rd in luck. By the way, with KenPom's strength of schedule, I kept looking at the non-conference strength of schedule. My eye gravitated to the right. I'm like, oh, that's their overall strength of schedule, but no, the overall strength of schedule is actually this column where it says like net rating here under just the regular strength of schedule. So, oops. So I got to pay attention to that, but all right. Kansas and Iowa State is one of the biggest games up, maybe the biggest game tonight. Number 9 against number 2 at Iowa State, and Iowa State is favored in this game, and probably more so than what people would expect. Up from 5.5 to 6.5. It looks like 50% of tickets, 97% of the cash on Kansas right now, but I think the actual money has come in on Iowa State so far. And to me, I think the public's going to come in on Kansas. I mean, they know the name Kansas. They know both of these teams are good, but they're going to see this as a competitive matchup between two top 10 teams, I would have to imagine. But the odds makers are telling you Iowa State is better than Kansas is by a couple of points, as that's what they're laying here. I do agree with it. I would lay the points with Iowa State if I was going to play this game. Both teams are going to show up for this one. It's a second straight road game for Kansas as well. And Kansas does have Kansas State up next, although I don't think they're going to look ahead to a very down Kansas State, even though that is kind of a rivalry game. That'll be a bigger game for Kansas State. So does that mean I played Kansas State last night in a look ahead? I don't know, maybe. But Iowa State's coming off that nice big road win over Texas Tech, too, where Texas Tech blew it for me. So I don't know. I thought Iowa State was going to be looking ahead to Kansas in this one, though. So both teams are going to show up in this one. I would lean to Iowa State in that one. What else we have here? Cal is at North Carolina. I mean, North Carolina just beat NC State, which is a big rivalry. I don't know if that's really going to necessarily put them in a letdown spot, though, when they only beat NC State by 2. It is going to be a weird spot for Cal, having to travel to the East Coast and play at Chapel Hill. And they did just lose at home, though, so maybe getting out of home might help them, although this is college, not pro. So you don't really have as many home distractions necessarily. But having to travel cross-country like that after, well, they lost to Virginia Tech, but it is an unfamiliar travel situation for Cal, so it could be a little bit difficult for them. So I would probably somewhat lean to North Carolina on that one. North Carolina's down, actually, though, from 15.5 to 14.5. Obviously, I'm not going to touch that game. I mean, there's no way I want to do that. I don't even know. Who does North Carolina have up next? Yeah, just Stanford. I don't think that's really cause for a look at. NC State, however, because they played a tough game against UNC, and UNC is the big boy there. So that's a bigger game for NC State. Usually now they're having to go out on the road to face a Virginia Tech team that just lost all the way out in California. Or excuse me, they won out in California after losing to Stanford, and now they're coming back home. It looks like a better spot to me for Virginia Tech in this one. NC State coming off the big rivalry game. NC State's down from 2.5 to 1.5, so I would lean to Virginia Tech in that one. Probably would also lean to St. Bonaventure to bounce back after that bad loss to LaSalle, even though it did go into overtime. Richmond coming off playing Rhode Island and George Mason, both really close. Those are both step-up games for Richmond, who's a little bit down now. I know St. Bonaventure is a big game too. St. Louis is also a big game too, but looks like a bounce-back spot to me for Bonaventure. They're up from 12.5 to 13, so I would look to lay the points there in that one. Duquesne, actually, I like a lot. I almost played Duquesne plus the points here. George Washington, they just pulled off 2 big wins in a row, upset wins at home against Dayton, which was a 9.5-point upset. As George Washington, the oddsmakers continue to tell you, George Washington is not as good as their record indicates. And then they beat Rhode Island, who I think is also kind of overrated. Like their record makes them look better than they actually are right now. But that was still a 5.5-point road upset for George Washington. So George Washington, like how many games in a row can they actually do this? And then they have George Mason up next. George Mason is sitting at second in the conference right now. George Washington might overlook this Duquesne team, even though Duquesne is a little bit on the rise. Their record overall is still awful, but I've been telling you, this Duquesne team faced a really difficult early season schedule. They're the team that won this conference last year, but I still think they're flying under the radar. I mean, they came from out of nowhere as like the 6th seed to do that last year, and this year they're starting to step it up since conference play started. I mean, some of these wins are pretty nice recently against UC Irvine, Rhode Island, and then they had maybe a sandwich type of spot on the road against Davidson. I won't knock them that much. I mean, they've only played 2 road games all year, and then they beat St. Joe's in their last game, which is a big win, but is it so big they're going to be in a letdown spot? Probably not. I mean, I don't know. St. Joe's is behind them, at least in conference standing right now, even though they are a good team. Although, I don't know, because Dayton, the same argument could be made there, but we know Dayton's definitely good. Duquesne, I think they continue to fly under the radar, though. And George Washington's having to play a 3rd straight big game in a row. It could be in like a double letdown spot at this point. It may overlook Duquesne because of their still ugly records. So these records are not indicative of what these teams actually are. George Washington is barely the better team over Duquesne, if they even are. I think it's pretty close, actually. George Washington down from 4.5 to 4 now with 67% of tickets and 64% of the cash. So reverse line movement coming on the Duquesne side, going against George Washington. And again, I would agree with it. I like Duquesne in that one. That's close to being a play for me. I do like that one. George Mason and Dayton will be a good one in the same conference here. Dayton sitting up from 7 to 7.5 actually. So it looks like some money has come in a little bit on the Dayton side. That's a situation where maybe I agree with it. I mean, Dayton's coming off an ugly loss at UMass, which was a 2nd straight road loss. Like they're they got to be looking to bounce back after a loss to a pretty bad opponent like that. Meanwhile, George Mason just beat that same UMass team, so the public might come in and think, well, wait a minute. If George Mason just beat UMass and Dayton just lost to UMass, and you're telling me you're giving me like 7.5 with George Mason, it looks so easy to take George Mason in that game, but I would not do it. I would lay it with Dayton in that one. Let's see. I mean, Seton Hall at Butler and kind of the dregs of the Big East at this point. Two teams that are a little bit down at the moment. Wofford at Chattanooga. Chattanooga almost a play for me. Wofford just beat Furman by almost 20 points on the road, man. That's a huge win. Furman, one of the better teams in this conference, probably the second best between them and Samford there. And then Wofford, now they have to go second straight road game to Chattanooga. I know Chattanooga's been playing decent, but that was a huge upset win for Wofford, and they do have Mercer up next, and Mercer, I don't know if they're going to actually look ahead to Mercer, and Mercer's actually behind Chattanooga. I don't know. But just because I think it's a bit of a letdown spot, I would lean to Chattanooga in this one. Chattanooga just beat VMI to bounce back from a loss. I mean, that was an easy win, obviously. Chattanooga's only conference wins so far, both against the worst teams, the two military academies, but Chattanooga's not a bad team. They're up from 3-3 with juice. I think it is 3.5 at some spots there. So it looks like some money is coming in on that Chattanooga side there. So I would probably look in that direction. Samford in the same conference here, the SoCon. Nice win over UNC Greensboro. So they just beat the other team that was tied with them atop the conference, both undefeated records, and they knocked them from the ranks of the unbeaten. Now they have to go on the road to step down and face this Mercer team who's not as good. And then they got East Tennessee up next, and East Tennessee is the other team sitting right behind them in the conference standings. So this could be a little bit of a sandwich for Samford here. So I would consider taking the points with Mercer in this one. Mercer, again, coming off that ugly loss to Western Carolina, but I talked about why I think that wasn't that bad a loss. I think it was a sandwich spot coming off that close game against East Tennessee, and with Samford up next, which is this game now. So I lean to Mercer in that one. Samford is up from 5.5 to 6 on the road, though. Samford is definitely the better team. Mercer, I believe both of these teams actually played are like frenetically fast paced too, so that could be an interesting one. And East Tennessee at Furman is also an interesting one in that conference with two of the better teams in the conference. Furman just laying the 3 at home. Odds makers kind of telling you both teams about even in that one. Penn State is at Michigan State. I mean, this one might fly under the radar, but it is kind of an interesting one. Michigan State, they're just on a roll right now, man. I mean, I don't really consider them to be in a bad spot here. I mean, they just have a ton of momentum coming into this. I think they may continue to roll. I mean, they're a very good team right now. Illinois, maybe a little bit of a look ahead. So I don't know about that, but I don't know. I would not want to jump in front of that Michigan State train right now. Penn State, I mean, they're coming off a couple of difficult opponents. Illinois, but they got annihilated by Illinois. And then I took Penn State in the next game. They almost beat Oregon. That was a big step-up game for Penn State, and they came within 1 point of both the spread and of winning. They covered by 1 point. They were a +2, 2.5 underdog, whatever it was. So that was a big game. Now they have to face a third straight ranked team, and coming off that big effort against Oregon, they fell just short. I don't think it looks like the greatest spot for Penn State here, having to go out on the road. And we've seen them going out on the road so far hasn't worked out well. Losing at Rutgers and getting absolutely ridiculously annihilated at Illinois State. Illinois State would be way worse. I would lay the points with Michigan State here. They're up from 10 to 11.5 now in that one. Yeah, I mean, that's the only way I would look there. Troy, as we get some of the Sun Belt action going on, they just played really close against Texas State and Arkansas State. Those are both difficult teams. Texas State, I know they don't look good as they're way down here, but they're actually a pretty decent team in this somewhat packed Sun Belt conference. And Arkansas State is maybe the best team in the Sun Belt right now, one of them. Troy played both of those teams really close. Now they go out on the road to face UL Monroe. And up next, they got South Alabama, who's the team sitting at the top of the conference right now. So I think it does look like an overlooked spot for Troy, where they may overlook UL Monroe, although they are up from 11 to 12, and it looks like it's continuing to climb. So if you do like UL Monroe, I mean, you get more line value on that at the very least. But UL Monroe is a very, very bad team, so I don't really know if I would actually want to do it. I mean, it might be such a mismatch that the bad spot for Troy doesn't even matter. Georgia and Tennessee is our other ranked matchup here. Number 23, Georgia at number 6, Tennessee. I mean, Georgia has been playing real well recently. beat Kentucky, and then they didn't suffer a letdown, also beating Oklahoma. Oklahoma was kind of shifting their lineup around a little bit, and Oklahoma played well in that game for a while and then kind of fell apart near the end, and Georgia won that game. Now Georgia has to go out on the road, though. Their last road conference game didn't work out well as they lost by double digits to Ole Miss. That was actually their only true road game so far. So this looks like a tough spot to me for Georgia. I would expect Tennessee is going to show up and beat them in this game. I mean, Tennessee is coming off a win over Texas where that was a fairly close game. It was kind of a spot where Tennessee, I think they were in a bit of a hangover spot after their first loss of the season to Florida, which was such a step-up game. They lost in such a humiliating fashion that I think it had the opposite effect of having a bounce-back spot. Like when you have a big game like that and you're undefeated on the season, you face a huge opponent like that and you lose, it's a defeat that can kind of hang you over into the next game, and I think it did. So this now looks like a bounce-back spot to me for Tennessee as they return home. So that's the way that I would look in that one. I would lay the points with Tennessee if I was going to play it. It's up from 10.5 to 11 with juice. 80% of tickets, 98% of the cash. I mean, Tennessee is going to be public, but in that one, I think it is okay to join the public. It's not always the wrong thing to do. So that's the side I like there. West Virginia is at Houston. I mean, West Virginia coming off going into elevation. They had to go into Colorado, which I thought was a difficult spot, and they still won that game. And now they have a second straight road game now coming back into Houston, which, I mean, at least they're more familiar with playing in Houston because Houston's been in the conference for a while. But I just think the spot's not very good. And I think Houston's underrated right now at 10th in the country. I think they're a top 5 team in the country easily right now. Houston's only losses are to Auburn, Alabama, and then San Diego State, all in some of those weird early season tournaments, and they were all close games. Since then, Houston hasn't lost. I know they've faced very weak conference opponents so far, but I still think Houston is underrated right now as far as how good they are. West Virginia, I think, is actually overrated right now as they were in the rankings. They actually dropped out of the rankings even though they won their last game. I think West Virginia is like maybe a top like 40 team or so, so I would probably lay the points with Houston in this one. Houston's got momentum. They're just rolling. The public's going to look at this and I think probably think this is way too many points with both of these teams looking like they're pretty competitive. Houston up from 15 to 17 with juice, though, so the line's kind of getting away from you a little bit there. Tickets evenly split 50-50, 91% of the cash on West Virginia, which I don't even think that's accurate. I would look to lay the points with Houston in that one. Whew, all right, South Alabama and that Sun Belt I just mentioned, they're atop the Sun Belt. They just beat Arkansas State and then lost to Old Dominion, and they have Troy up next. So those 3 games are all against the teams that are right at the top of the conference right now. And they have this Southern Miss game mixed in the middle there, so they could overlook Southern Miss, man. And especially they're coming off a loss that broke like a long win streak for them too, and sometimes that can hang you over as well against a good team as well, in Old Dominion, who's top of the conference right now. And with Troy up next, yeah, it could be a little bit of a look ahead there for them. Let me see. Where's Southern Miss? So Mississippi. South Alabama's up a little bit, a tick from 11 to 11.5. But I would probably only take the points there, but it might be enough of a mismatch that it's not going to look that great anyway. It'll be bad. I don't want to talk about all these, the rest of these undercard games here, but I will talk about 2 of these remaining 3 here because I have plays on both of them. So I have plays early on in the 6:30 slate, and then you got to wait until 9:30, 10 p.m. Eastern for the other 2. But that's just the way it works out. Washington plus 7.5 is going to be a play. As I mentioned, 7 is a key number in basketball, so you want to get the 7.5 or better if you can on this one if you're going to play Washington. This is against Purdue. I mean, 7 is where the cutoff is when teams stop intentionally fouling because it's when you're down by 3 possessions, so that is the cutoff in basketball. One of the key numbers in basketball, if there really is a key number in basketball, it would be, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 7, basically. Purdue, yeah, I know, they're ranked 17th in the country. They're definitely a good team, but I don't like how this sets up for Purdue at all, man. I mean, they just put up 100 points against Nebraska, absolutely thrashing Nebraska, who's not even that bad a team, beating them by almost 40 points. Coming off of that, you got to be feeling pretty high on yourselves, and now you're going out to Washington, who has not been playing well in conference. They only have 1 conference win, although it was in a spot like this where they caught Maryland, I believe, coming out west like this. Could be a spot where Purdue gets caught. And up next in a couple days, they got Oregon, which is going to be, I believe, their Saturday game. Big ranked matchup against Oregon. And they got Ohio State and Michigan and Indiana up after this. So this game is a game they might overlook, man. I think it's actually a sandwich spot. When you have a 100-point score on one end of it and a 40-something point win almost, or almost 40-point win on one end of it, and then a ranked good opponent on the other end of it. I think it classifies as a sandwich, and it's a weird, unfamiliar environment having to go out to Washington, out to the Pacific Coast. This is not something these Big Ten teams are used to, man. These staple Big Ten teams, they don't travel out to the Pacific Coast, and now Purdue's going to have to do just that. They have not done that this year. Their true road games are at Penn State, which, by the way, they lost by double digits, and I won on that one. They lost at Marquette, which I was also on. Lost that by double digits, so not good for Purdue on the road. And I'm 2-0 in those games, by the way. And then I did not play either side in this one, but I mentioned explicitly I did not want to take Rutgers in this game on the road. So they beat Minnesota and Rutgers on the road, but both of those teams suck. And those are games I did not have any involvement in. I did not think those are good spots to fade Purdue. But this one I think is, and I'm 2-0 and fading Purdue on the road. Purdue, the better teams they face on the road, they have not done well against them. I think Washington probably is better than both Minnesota and Rutgers. I think Rutgers was very overrated to start the season. I think they're still overrated. So I think this is a spot to fade Purdue. They're down from 8 to 7.5. Looks like the money is coming in on Washington. 78%, but 50% of tickets evenly split. I think it might wind up being a pros versus Joes type of scenario there for Purdue. Give me the points with Washington in that one. I don't know what KenPom has the number at, but I mean, I know he has Purdue as the better team. They face a stronger strength of schedule. They're decently up there in luck index. Slow tempo, almost number 300 in tempo. We know Purdue plays pretty slow. As far as Washington, yeah, they're way down here, below Washington State. Washington plays a faster tempo, so they may be able to push the pace in this one and throw Purdue off a little bit. Washington 121st in tempo. Washington's actually has a difficult schedule too. Never mind, at 30th. I was looking at the wrong number here. Their non-conference wasn't tough, but their conference schedule has been tough so far. So they're 30th overall in strength of schedule now. Both teams kind of similar in luck index. That doesn't worry me that much. Washington at least is decent on defense, top 100. They can be competitive in this game. I mean, you got a team that plays some semblance of defense, getting a ton of points at home in a good spot, and maybe able to flip the pace on Purdue. Give me Washington in that one. And then to close it out, I'm also going to lay the points with Oklahoma at 2.5. This one's up from 2.5 to 2.5 with juice. So you may have to lay like 3 or maybe look for a money line on this one. Either way, I like Oklahoma in this spot in the basketball edition of the Red River rivalry, which doesn't mean as much as it does in football. I mean, look at what Texas is coming off of, man. They just played Texas A&M, Auburn, and Tennessee, and they played Auburn to within 5 points at home, and then Tennessee to within 4 points at home. How do you get back up off the mat after something like that, man? Texas was in this game the whole way, and they're winning for a majority of the second half. Almost beat Tennessee, and I told you Tennessee was in a hangover spot because they were coming off that first loss of the season to Florida, where a lot of times it can have a tendency to make you lose the game twice, and Tennessee almost got caught there. That was the type of spot. Texas, I think they're a little bit down this year, man. And now they're going out on the road. I don't like it. The other conference road game they had was against Texas A&M, although Texas A&M is better than Oklahoma, but still, they lost by 20 points there, and obviously I don't need a 20-point margin of victory here. And that was actually Texas's only other road game besides NC State. So they've only played 2 games on the road. They only beat NC State by 4, and they lost by 20 to Texas A&M. And they got Florida coming up after OU. So, I mean, I don't know that they're necessarily going to overlook OU in a what is kind of a rivalry game to some extent, but coming off of multiple really tough performances against Auburn and Tennessee, and I think they played Auburn. Oh, no, they didn't play Auburn that close. They were getting kind of blown out, and then they actually didn't go away, though, and came all the way back. So putting in those 2 huge efforts and taking Tennessee basically to the wire in that game, now going out on the road and with Florida up next, I don't think it's a good spot at all. And Oklahoma, they still don't have a conference win yet. They're looking for a conference win as a new member of the SEC here. They got to get one, man, but they've lost on the road to Alabama, at home by 2 to Texas A&M, and then on the road at Georgia. I'm not going to really knock them for any of that. I mean, those games were not easy. I think this is a spot where they're going to bounce back. I like it. That Georgia game, I mean, Oklahoma was also shuffling their lineup around to try to fix some things, and it was working for the first half. They were doing pretty well early in the game, and then they kind of just sputtered out. They were winning at halftime, and then they just kind of faded in the later portions of that game. I think it's going to be a bounce-back spot. I think they're going to be highly motivated and probably the team more focused on this game. So, yeah, give me Oklahoma in that one. And then I will say Utah State, kind of interesting. They're only laying 5 at UNLV. They're up in the rankings now. This Utah State team just looking really good. They just beat Boise. They got Nevada up next. I don't know if they're really going to overlook UNLV, although Nevada's been kind of more of a better team in this conference for a while. UNLV maybe flying a little bit under the radar. They're not a terrible team, and they're coming off a couple of embarrassing road losses to Boise and Colorado State. And we just saw Utah State beat Boise, and Boise massacred UNLV. So the public's going to look at this and think this is so easy to lay 5 with Utah State, but I would hesitate to do that. It might be a spot where UNLV comes in within that number. All right, let's go to NHL, I guess. UNLV, again, they're trying to bounce back from a couple of real hideous losses. Hockey, we just have 2 games today. Carolina's at Buffalo. I mean, not a whole lot to see here with this game, I don't think. Carolina up from minus 175 to minus 185. I don't see much going on in the percentage department yet. Carolina just lost in overtime to Anaheim, so they're in a bounce-back spot. And you got a good team that's in a bounce-back spot. They've had a couple of days off to get over that and now fly up to Buffalo from Carolina. I think it's a decent spot for them to bounce back, even though they do have Vegas up next when they just lost to Anaheim. I think you're going to see a focused Carolina team in that one. And then Buffalo, as far as they're concerned, I mean, they just lost 6-2, though, to Seattle, but it was also yesterday, I'm pretty sure. So they're in, or no, it wasn't yesterday. What am I thinking? Seattle played somebody yesterday with a similar score, I think. I don't know. But Buffalo, all right, never mind. Buffalo's actually had a lot of time off to try to refocus after that loss as well. So both teams in focus spots there. So I'm not going to have anything to do with that one. And then Edmonton, Minnesota, much better game. But, I mean, the odds makers are telling you what to think about Minnesota as they're now a minus 190 home underdog. Or Edmonton's a minus 190 road favorite, I mean, at Minnesota. Edmonton up from minus 165 to minus 190. 50% of the tickets, but 93% of the cash on Edmonton. Looks like the actual money's coming in on Edmonton. I tend to agree with it in a situation where I think both teams are kind of in a similar spot. Edmonton is the better of these two teams, and the public might come in and think, oh my God, you got like the teams have almost even records, and you're giving me that big of an underdog price at home with the Minnesota Wild. The public's going to want to come in and play the Wild. But again, I mean, the Wild are close to 500 at home, and the Oilers have been road warriors. They've been really good on the road. The Oilers are the better of these two teams, despite what the records might indicate. I think Minnesota's overrated right now, just like their football team, man. These Minnesota folks can't catch a break with all these overrated teams. I like Edmonton in this one, even though they just beat the Kings. I know that was a return home spot. Now they have to go back out on the road. But this means they're starting a road trip with momentum at the very least. I know they have Colorado up next, but I don't think they're going to overlook a game against Minnesota. Minnesota, they're not going to overlook this game either, but they're coming off an ugly loss to Vegas. And this is a return home spot for them. But I think it's a situation where both teams probably are going to show up for that one. So I would probably look to where the market is indicating on that one in. The fact that the line looks a little bit misleading. NBA, we have a pretty big NBA slate. I don't really want to talk about every one of these games, although I will say 76ers are still looking for playoff revenge against the Knicks from last year. The Knicks eliminated them. Knicks up from 5.5 to 6, 83% against 92% of cash. So it doesn't look like the money coming in on the Knicks side. This one you got to see what the Joel Embiid situation is because he's never playing anymore for the most part. You got a lot of guys listed as game time decisions for the Knicks. Brunson, Towns. Looks like they're probably both going to play based on that number there. And I don't see Embiid even listed on here, so I don't know what the deal is there, why the Knicks are favored by that much. I don't know. I don't know what I would do in that game, to be honest. The Knicks are coming off a loss to Detroit, so probably kind of in a bounce-back spot where Philadelphia lost a few games in a row as well, but they lost to Oklahoma City. I mean, a more difficult game at the very least. Boston, I think, is probably in a bounce-back spot right now, up from 10.5 to now 14. The line was 13.5 this morning. It keeps climbing. It won't go away. 75% of tickets, 95% of the cash. I agree with the Celtics side, but I'm not going to lay the points here. And I think the line is getting a little bit too far. The spot is good to play Boston, though. I mean, Boston just had a couple of bad games at home, getting wrecked by Sacramento, which was a game I was on because it was a return home spot for the Celtics. Bad spot. Then they beat the Pelicans, which was a game I was on the Celtics in that one, and Celtics did not cover in that one, and they played pretty badly in that one too and almost lost to a Pelicans team that at least does have kind of most of their players back now for the most part. But now the Celtics, after some bad home performances, they get to go out on the road. I know the Celtics. I know I said that in their last game, and I wasn't right, but more often than not, I am. And this is a spot where the Celtics are probably going to bounce back and be focused. Going on the road tends to help them even more when they've been playing embarrassingly at home. They go out on the road, they forget about that shit, and they tend to just focus on basketball and play a really good game. My issue is that the Celtics did just beat Toronto by 54 points at home, so that's going to tend to make it so that you're not getting line value anymore. The Celtics are 16.5 in that game at home, so this line should probably be closer to like 11.5 in this game, so you're not getting any line value. Or no, well, maybe like 12 and a half. So you're not really getting any line value here. Toronto did just beat Golden State, which is a nice win when you beat a team like Golden State that has a lot of name recognition behind them, even though they're not playing well this year. So are they going to be in a letdown spot after that? Probably not, because it is Boston, and Boston just completely embarrassed them. So Toronto, I expect, is probably going to show up and try to play in this game as well, but they might just run out of steam. But then again, that broke their losing streak that they had. And these losses were not that embarrassing. Losing to Orlando, Milwaukee, Knicks, Cleveland, and the Detroit's not even that bad. And that was a road game. So those games were not really that bad for the most part for Toronto. So I don't know. I still lean to the Celtics because they're the significantly better team. And if they're going to show up and play, they should be able to win by margin there. But I'm not going to do it. Let's see. Orlando and Milwaukee is my only NBA play, and it is taking the points with the Magic +6 here. We got Bucks are already down from 7 to 5.5. Now, I wish I was able to take the 7. I don't think I ever saw the 7. I think I only saw 6.5 and 6. Looks like it's continuing to move towards the Magic. 60% of tickets on the Bucks, though. So the public actually coming in, laying the points of the Bucks. Kind of surprising to me if that's true, because I would think they would tend to think this is a more competitive matchup. Magic, 94% of tickets thrown. I agree with the Magic in this one. I mean, Orlando's coming off beating Philadelphia, which I think is just going to be kind of a spot, like a type of win that's going to give them new momentum going forward. And they're going out on the road now after that, and they have a couple of days off. So they're the way more rested team, which I think is part of the reason why the money's moving in their direction, but I obviously agree with it as well. And the game before that, they lost at home to Milwaukee, so it's very quick turnaround, road revenge for Orlando after they lost at home to Milwaukee, and I believe that was Banchero's first game back, and they still covered the game, but that was his first game back, so that was an injured player theory spot now. Now this is his third game back, so they're rolling. They still won't have Suggs or Wagner back, but Banchero's back, so you're going to get a pretty decently intact Orlando team at this point. And in this quick kind of revenge spot here, I like it quite a bit, even though, beating Philadelphia, I don't think that's a huge win or anything like that. I know they have Boston up next too, which may be a look ahead, but they did just beat Boston not that long ago, though it's always going to be a little bit of a look ahead, a concern with Boston. But I expect Orlando to show up in this game, man, and beat Milwaukee. Milwaukee just beat them. They want to return the favor. Milwaukee, on the other hand, just wiped Sacramento, but that was yesterday, and now they're playing a back-to-back, although they're staying at home this time at least. But before that, they were out on the road over in Orlando and then in New York. Like I said, they won at Orlando on the 10th. So they're now playing a third game in 4 days and a fourth game in 6 days, with the first two being in different cities and then coming back home. So 3 different cities involved there. A lot of travel. The rest advantage is definitely on the side of Orlando. They have a little bit of quick road reversal revenge here to get Milwaukee back for beating them in their place. They want to go out and beat Milwaukee in their place. I like it. Milwaukee, I don't even know if they're going to rest players in this one because it is the back-to-back. I don't know, but give me Orlando. They probably won't, but give me Orlando in this one. As you can see, it looks like Caldwell Pope is a game-time decision, so I don't know if he's going to play. Same with Middleton on the other side for the Bucks. So I think those two factors kind of cancel out a little bit. And if anything, the Bucks will be losing a better player out of those two guys. So that's what I like there. That's the one play that I have in the NBA. And then real quickly, before I get out of here, maybe I'll just hit a couple of these games quickly, the better games. Warriors, T-Wolves. T-Wolves up from 5 to 6 at home, but 81% of tickets and only 59% of the cash. So it looks like the line has moved in a decently significant fashion towards the T-Wolves, but it looks like they are public with less of the cash on them. So I don't know what I would do with this game, though, man. I mean, Golden State, they just lost to Toronto. So in a way, it tells me it's got to be a bounce back spot for Golden State because that's terrible, losing to Toronto. I mean, how do you allow that to happen? I don't know. It was on the road. So they may actually show up focused here, whereas Minnesota, I mean, they just beat Washington, which, again, that's not going to matter either. So tough game to read in that one. It may be more of a focus spot for Golden State just because it's an uglier game they're coming off of. Houston and Denver is the other big game here. Denver just beat Dallas twice on the road, and now they're returning back home. So I would slightly lean to Houston in this one. I mean, those are big wins for Denver. They're not going to overlook Houston, but Houston, they're playing real nice basketball this year, man. Nice turnaround with this young team here. Really starting to, build themselves up a little bit. They're coming off 2 straight wins against Memphis, though. But they are starting a road trip, so I think it is a more focused spot for them still, even though those are big wins. Going out to start a road trip tends to be a more focused spot for you. Although I know Denver, when they beat Dallas, of course, Dallas was without Luka. So, I mean, that's the one thing. I don't know. They're going to be in a true letdown spot after that. I don't know, but we will see. That's going to do it for me, man. My plays one more time today. College basketball, 4 plays. Vandy minus 8.5 or whatever you can get. Get the best number you can, obviously. Davidson minus 1.5. Washington plus 7.5. Oklahoma minus 2.5. And NBA Orlando Magic plus 6. That's going to do it for me. I'm Tower Gang Toad. Follow me on Twitter. Tower Gang Podcast. Patreon.com/Tower Gang. Throw us some support for the most funny, offensive podcast you'll ever hear. We are live tonight as well. And if you're in the Patreon, you get live pre-show and post-show. Starting tonight, you'll be able to watch those with us. We go live at 9:11 p.m. Eastern Tower Time, baby. Come and laugh with us, man. If you're in the Patreon, you'll be able to start watching us earlier. The pre-show tends to be kind of a mess where we're setting things up and just shooting the shit. And then the post-show is just more of the same, but even more offensive. Let's do it. Thanks, guys, and have a good one. Have a good Wednesday, everybody. Peace.